Hi, everybody. David Nour. I want to welcome you back to another episode of the Sales Community's live stream. I'm elated to be joined by my co-host, Randy Seidl. Hello, Randy.
Hey, Nour. How's it going?
Good. It's good to see you. We've got a friend of yours. We got a guest joining us as well.
Great to be seen. I actually had lunch with an elderly friend the other day, and he said it's good to be seen as opposed to viewed. So I guess I could say the same thing. Yeah, really excited to have Andrew, and I don't know, this is what 3 or 4 here using LinkedIn Live, which is a great platform. Great to be interactive. But Andrew, really excited to have you. Your podcast that we had on earlier, which folks can see on Sales Community or Spotify or YouTube, was fantastic, and the early success that you're having with Astronomer, a great company, and you've certainly had a early success. So how about introducing yourself to everybody yourself?
Awesome. Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Randy, or I guess Nour, which I guess that means I'm cool and part of the club if I could call you by your last name. So we'll just ride Randy's coattails here. It's a successful strategy, but thanks. I appreciate it. Andrew Ettinger, CRO of Astronomer. We're the commercial developers of a wonderful open source project called Apache Airflow, which helps people orchestrate and manage their data pipelines, which is super exciting, playing in the middle of the whole data.
Where Andrew is breaking in and out. So that's all right. So while we get Andrew back. Andrew, we lost you for a quick second. So I heard automated data pipelines.
Oh, okay. Sorry, Nour. I'm here. I don't know what happened. So Astronomer is the commercial developer of Apache Airflow, helping people automate their data pipelines. It's super exciting open source project, very vibrant. We're playing in the middle of that. And so I'm the CRO here. And before that, I was with some startups, and I was at Pivotal for 10 years, where we had a nice run and took the company public around helping people modernize their applications into the cloud around another popular open source project called Spring Boot. So very passionate about the role of open source communities and how content can drive them and drive value.
That's great. It's great to have you. So for our audience, would love to, I've got questions, Randy and Andrew. We're going to build on the podcast that Andrew and I, we kind of 3 of us put together this morning. I want to encourage our audience to jump in with questions, comments of me, Randy, or Andrew as we go through this live stream. So Andrew, let me ask. I think this Apache Airflow came out of Airbnb. Talk about its genesis and how is it different? Why does it matter? Talk a little about the technology.
Yeah, I mean, look, like most open source projects, you have brilliant engineers that are solving a problem that's largely unmet. And in the case of Airbnb, it was really, how do you build all of these massive dependencies in Python to enable their data pipelines to serve the integration of data across all of their different systems to run deep computational analytics at scale? In their opinion, there wasn't anything largely out there that served those needs, so they created it and open sourced it. We took the stewardship of the community to provide all the release engineering and management of the community to really help make that a top level and first class Apache Software Foundation project. We still partner with Airbnb today at scale, and they still do wonderful things to contribute massively. But it's really exploded with over 600,000 downloads per month right now, and all of the vanity metrics you'd like to see in a popular open source project, which I joke is not how we measure our success, but it's a litmus test of how vibrant the community is with, 20,000 plus Git stars, et cetera. And so it's really emerged as a de facto part of a modern data infrastructure and fabric, and, super excited to be working on it.
So I have to ask, in a open source type environment, what's the business model? Are you selling some things to developers, or you talk about the business model and what are you selling?
No, it's free. It's free. Everything's free. I mean, look, the business model, all joking aside, I mean, our first job is to make sure that the community thrives and the community wins and that Airflow is successful. So all kidding aside, our job number one has nothing to do with monetization, right? We're stewards of the community, and that's very important to make sure that people get value out of that. We're delivering the content, the education, the training, the certifications, and advancing any of the technical issues or opportunities that come up. From there, it's all about working with customers in the traditional sense of how open source companies work, right? Around support and around providing an operational framework so that companies don't have to focus their time in precious engineering resources on undifferentiated lifting, right, at the infra layer down. And so we give them that abstraction layer so they can focus on airflow up and really then focus on accelerating the time to value that they take from their data pipelines into the people that can make accelerated use of that to drive value.
Got it. So Randy, our friend Ashley Hall, she's awesome. She comes to like every one of these. She's on and she's got a question of both of you.
Yeah. So Ashley, thanks. What books do you recommend I read to become a CRO? Well, that's a great question. I actually have one coming out called Your Go-To Sales Advisor, and we have got Andrew and Nour and 90 other folks from our Sales Community Advisory Board have some of their best practices. I've got a couple dozen best practices. Tony Jerry, who I'm co-authoring with, has kind of 50 odd or so. And we're very fortunate to have Walter Brown, who's unfortunately since passed, but early on at EMC, did two great handbooks, one for sales reps and one's for sales managers. And matter of fact, last week, Mike Ruckers, who's a longtime CEO of EMC, said that Walter is probably the father or godfather of direct sales. So that is one book up and coming that for sure should be on your list.
Andrew, how about you?
I can't touch that. Am I supposed to say that there's a book better than what Randy's about to come out with? I mean, come on, right? I'll get kicked off and blacklisted. I can't do that. So outside of Randy's, if you were to venture into any other books in the universe, right, which you won't need any, but if you were, right, I love Only the Paranoid Survive. So, maybe that's a character flaw. And the other thing is the hard thing about hard things. Right. I think when you combine those two, I think they're awesome. There's obviously hundreds of others, but those are the two that come to mind after Randy's.
Let me also actually add one, a book called Power Questions by a guy named Andrew Sobel, Sobel. It's on my bookshelf. It's all about building relationships, winning new business, and influencing others.
Yeah. And Nour, what about yourself between relationship economics or curve benders? Which of those or both would you recommend?
I appreciate that, Randy. So yeah, I was going to say relationship economics is another one that's just very foundational in terms of you building great relationships inside and outside your organization. So Randy, thanks for bringing that up. So Andrew, talk about, obviously I really appreciated your comment about grit, passion, and intellectual curiosity and betting on people. And obviously the title of the podcast, I want to talk about that a second. Talk about some of those attributes. Where do you believe, are they nature? Do great sales reps you've hired, you've been around at, I think, last company, you guys went from 0 to like 500 million in revenue. Great sales professionals you've been around. Is grit, passion, and intellectual curiosity nature? Are they born that way? Or is it nurture where somebody teaches them how to develop those attributes?
Yeah, it's a very good question. My belief is that it's in your DNA. I think you can teach aspects of it to be better, and you can help to guide people to start to think that way. But in my experience, the execution against those core principles that manifest itself into the way of the outcomes that people are seeking really just are deeply entrenched, right, in your DNA, right? And I think, back to the question about becoming a CRO, if you're involved in this high-tech landscape in the startup world, right, you've got to be mission-driven, right? And you've got to be, right, deeply believing in that mission and have all of the attributes you spoke about to drive that. And I just think a lot of that's in your DNA. It's not a bad thing if you don't have it, because this isn't for everyone, and there's probably easier things in life to go do. But you've got to have that, and you're kind of born with it. But Randy, I don't know if you've seen other cases where you might be able to overcome that.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to have an attitude and an aptitude and desire. So, people may or may not be born. You have to have, as you say, a lot of the grit and the desire, but certainly I think, anything in life, could be coached. And you and I may not be able to be accountants or surgeons, but if we say, hey, we want to go do it, we'll probably go figure it out.
Randy, give me an example of grit in a sales rep or a sales manager you've seen recently or you've seen in your journey that really resonates with you. We talk a lot about it. What does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, it's several facets, but I think one in particular is kind of just never giving up, right? So if you hear no, that's when this, selling starts. And I think with the younger generation these days, it's, they may just take that for granted, but kind of really pushing back, whether it's, trying to get an interview with a company when you get turned down. A lot of companies just, are, quick yes or no. And, we're, for my recruiting business, they say, hey, I can go represent you, but hey, nobody better than yourself. So here's a hiring manager. Here's who's on the recruiting team. Go after them. And in a customer selling situation, absolutely, make sure that you're pushing and they see that passion.
Andrew, I'm going to ask you the same question. Intellectual curiosity is easier to talk about. Give me an example. What does that look like? How does that manifest itself in a sales rep?
Yeah, I mean, it's second and third line thinking and asking questions and really showing that you can connect the dots, right, in some of the emerging trends in tech and apply that back in a very simple and concise, statement that people can understand and relate to, right? Because if you're not curious about understanding on how all those things link together, you'll never be able to problem solve in the right way.
And Randy, passion, one of the things I've always believed in is a strength can actually become a stumbling block, right? Passion definitely falls in that category. What does passion look like in sales reps, and when does it become over the top?
I'm not sure over the top, but passion is just you wake up every day, fired up, excited. You kind of you're mission driven, as Andrew said, and you're probably not allowed to say kill anymore, but you want to go and win the deals and help the customers and get it done. And I don't know, it's hard for me to say how can you be too passionate. Obviously, you don't want to totally piss off and upset whoever it is that you're selling to or partnering with or managing up to. That might be maybe one example where passion relative to if you're doing something with your higher ups or something like that, and there may be a point where especially in big companies, you need to just kind of salute. You may totally disagree, but sometimes you just got to drop it.
Andrew, is there an overdoing those three? Is there too much of a good thing with those three?
Come on, it's a sales community. None of us have ever overdone anything ever. So no, absolutely not. I mean, look, I agree with what Randy said. And I think, most of us are pretty type A and most of us are pretty direct. I oftentimes can be too direct, which can come off as, maybe overdoing it a little bit. So I think there's some of that. Now, you're generally trying to do that with the right intent and the right passion and the will to win. But, there's definitely a balance there, as Randy suggested. And I think that's something that, most of us with those personalities have to be careful against.
Randy, we've got a question from Jesse.
What are some of the attributes you look for in a CEO as a partner in go-to-market? So I assume if you're kind of interviewing as a CRO or kind of sales executive, marketing executive, when you're looking at companies from a CEO perspective, things that I see, a lot of times they're more technical founders, and I think there's technical founders that admit they don't get sales at all, which is very authentic, very open, which is great. There's some that don't know sales that think they know it, which is a disaster. And then there's probably a third where they don't know sales and they really don't value it. And when stuff hits the fan and the numbers don't come, they point immediately to the CRO as opposed to CEO in terms of the products and the offerings or other issues that are there. But certainly any smaller company, and Andrew's had lots of experience with this. It's vital. What's the CEO like, and what's the board composition and support? What do you think, Andrew?
I couldn't agree more, Randy. I mean, I think it fundamentally comes down to one thing: it's trust, right? And so when you're working with the CEO, interviewing with the CEO, do you both fundamentally have mutual trust in each other, right? To share the right good news and bad news, to collaborate, to try things, and to give each other the right space to kind of go execute and kind of come back and share. And then it's, can you have the right operating cadence together that you can course correct and have those strategic discussions together? It sounds very easy, but in practice, it's actually very hard because there's a lot of emotions on all sides, particularly Randy, as you well articulated, if the CEO is the founder and it's, their baby. There's a lot of emotions for all the right reasons there. And so, trust even becomes more important. So I think you said it wonderfully, Randy.
Yeah. And also, I was just thinking too, there's, if it's not a startup, if it's an existing company, there's ones that, kind of, rotating door in terms of, some of the go-to-market leadership. I don't know if I'm allowed to mention names, but, one like a Cohesity where it's, it's like sort of, every year there's probably no tech company like that where kind of just rotates through. So again, doing the due diligence on, those that have been there before you, talking to them to kind of do due diligence as well is important.
So we've got a great question from, we're talking about passion and drive and grit. Brooke Madden wants to know, when they say no, what's the best advice you can give to convince them? Randy, you're masterful at overcoming this. When they say no, how are you convincing them otherwise?
Yes, I actually really believe this. No really means no. It's just either they don't understand what you're saying or you don't really understand what their needs are. So it's really kind of peeling back the onion to say, what is it that the real needs are? Are you addressing those needs? And, I'll always say if you're in the, elevator with the CFO, you're not going to talk about speeds and feeds. You're going to talk about business issues, about how you can help them generate revenue, get a competitive advantage, save money. So, drilling on things like that. Andrew, what's your perspective?
Yeah. Well, hey, Brooke, let's start with not getting them to say no. We could start there, but no. I'm kidding. Look, I agree with what you said, Randy. I mean, I think for me, it kind of comes down to just very basic blocking and tackling, which is what you said, Randy. And if you know their use case, you know your customer, right, and you know how to compete, i.e. what your competition is and the outcomes that they're trying to get, right, and you've done a deep introspection to really understand those three tenets, you should then be able to come up with a game plan in a very professional way to articulate, right, the intersection of those three against the outcomes they're seeking to achieve and lead them down that way. Because if you've done those three things right and you're getting a no, there's a disconnect, and you then need to find a way to resurface those things through content, through education, through a deeper level of understanding, and try to do it in a disarming way where you're not trying to sell and you're really trying to focus on the outcomes they're trying to achieve. And the customer really does want to achieve those. They'll sit down with you and discuss those, and you can have an opportunity to kind of reassess the strategy that you took forth to begin with.
Beautiful. So, Andrew, one of the things you and I talked about was the relationship between sales and marketing this morning on the podcast. James has got a question to build on that.
Yes. Hi, Andrew. Great podcast. I liked your thoughts on marketing and sales working together. What type of tactics or strategies are you using at Astronomer to grow and be efficient with CAC?
Yeah, great question. Thanks for listening to the podcast. I guess we got one viewer, so it's better than none. Yeah, I'll make sure to send it to my mom also, so we'll get the viewership up. So look, sales and marketing need to be tied at the hip. Sales and marketing need to be best friends. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it, and all the successful relationships in the world are based on that. I think in Astronomer in particular, we have the fortunate opportunity to have a very vibrant open source community where we have the opportunity to really serve the needs of the developer and the data engineer in this bottoms up PLG type of motion. And so working with marketing around driving that community with the right level of content to drive ultimately conversion. I call it the 3 C's. It all starts with community, right? And you've got to get them the right content. And if you do those two things well, right, which is very low cost, very easy to do, very hard to screw up, but very easy to do, you will then ultimately get the right level of conversion, provided that you're in the right space and have the right value prop and everything else. So we focus on the 3 C's, and it's served us really well, where our docs, our guides, our tutorials, right? The certifications, all of the things you would expect in a community are done very well, that drive that. And then ultimately people, kind of respect you as the authoritative source and kind of raise their hand to engage with you on some of the outcomes they're trying to achieve.
Randy, you see a lot of different sales and marketing teams work, some really well together, others you kind of tell that it's just not clicking as soon as you kind of talk to different folks. What are some of those attributes that really makes the great sales and marketing teams work together, really win together, and move the company's go-to-market strategy forward?
Yeah, well, from a personality perspective, it's definitely working as teams. But for the last question, you're talking about customer acquisition costs. It's really kind of metric driven, and there's some great marketing teams out there, but there's still, I think, a lot in tech where they kind of spend all this money. Most of the time, I'll say foolishly. CRO may not be kind of joined at the hip with them, and a CRO sitting there saying, "Geez, for that extra $100,000, $200,000, I could go hire a rep. I could run a better lead gen program. I could do some customer event type things." So I think just making sure that sales and marketing are aligned on what the metrics are to measure the ROI of the outcome. If that happens, usually everything else falls into place.
Let's stay on that topic. So obviously the last year, we've all become online sellers. We're not doing trade shows. We're not doing demo days. We're not doing customer events. I can't wait to get the vaccine so we can do some of those things. But Ben wants to know, I love this, old school field-centric selling versus remote.
Yep. Thanks, Ben. Curious to hear us chime in on what we're thinking about building and strengthening sales culture in a fully remote world. Anything we can recycle from our old school. So, I mean, different things. I'm sure Andrew's doing a bunch, but it's kind of, from a Zoom perspective, the one hand, it's a negative, but the other hand, it can bring people together. And I think having, kind of together events that are kind of not work centric. So, you can do different things with kind of drinks, or you have some facilitated sessions. You can kind of go around. You can have people could have their dog or their family or kids in there, but just I think getting to know everybody better on the one hand. And then on the work side, I think some things around just kind of sharing best practices. People being open. Hey, here are things I'm challenged with. How else can can somebody else? Are they facing this challenge? Is there some similar reference account situation? So just kind of try and build those communities where people are working together. And then ideally from doing something like that, then without doing a team Zoom, Ben, then you may have one rep in Boston working, reaching out to another rep in San Francisco, just kind of gelling based on that. Andrew, what types of things are you doing?
Yeah, a lot of what you mentioned, Randy. And so, I don't want to pile on, kind of what you spoke about there. I think the other thing is, intensely focused on not just like your classic, kind of skip level conversations or, kind of reviews, but cross department and making sure that you're facilitating, right, those relationships and those bridges, right, and support and development and finance, and making sure that the rest of the organization is well connected into the sales culture, but also on a personal level, because having those relationships, right, and building that team culture where people that don't have, the sales group, which talks 1,000 times a day and texts and Slacks and all that stuff all night, kind of can feel remote. And so kind of building the more broader culture and not just thinking so inwardly focused on just sales, I think then kind of plays to the whole notion of building a collective team. And we all know what teams do and how they perform when they're well aligned and feel united, right?
Ben, I won't let my feelings get hurt that you only asked Andrew and Randy about that, but that's okay.
Well, no, I was just going to ask you, because I know you've done some sales kickoffs for our friend Bill Hogan and others. Yeah. Nour, what are your thoughts and things that you've done and you help?
Yeah, I was gonna share with the two of you. I was actually, I can't take credit for this. I was a guest, a client of mine, an executive, invited me to an event where this was by Oracle. They had invited several of existing clients for Randy and Andrew for roundtable discussion and with other prospects. So instead of Oracle doing the selling, they had their clients talk about their environments, almost like a live case study a live example of we went from 20 some odd disparate systems that weren't working together to now we have this Oracle solution, for example, and having them answer each other's questions. And well, how'd you do that? And that sounds like a cultural transformation and shift. And how did you get buy-in from the CEO and the board? Because that's where I'm struggling with. So Ben and others, having your existing clients that, and you know this is one of those old school approaches. Nothing is a stronger testimonial than an existing relationship that has gotten value from your approach to solving their problem as a advocate, as a proponent for you and your value proposition to with prospects. And we can easily bring them together on a Zoom meeting and having them share, again, fundamental challenges they've overcome. So that's one that really just kind of was like, this is brilliant. We should do more of this. So on that note, Hunter wants to have a question, Randy.
All right. During a sales cycle, when do you feel it is time to move on before it becomes pestering? What is a good timeline to return to that prospect? So literally the last write-up I did was after the fact it was a week ago. We had I had several meetings that I was on coincidentally where the sales teams were not kind of doing follow-up. So in order to keep the ball moving as a kind of one-on-one thing, never, especially when it's a Zoom or face-to-face meeting, anything, never leave that meeting until you have an agreed to follow-up, because that gets the next step in place and that gets things marching. So that is always real critical. When the customer stops returning your call or says pound sand, that's probably another good indicator. But yeah, I think you just use your common sense and judgment around, one is, too much. And then there's also, playing for kind of, second place where, okay, if you lost, come up with a graceful way to say, well, hey, why don't you just try a smaller piece or, come up with a creative way. It may not be the big deal, but you can't get the big deal, just get a smaller deal that then could potentially, lead into something else.
Andrew, is pound sand a technical term in technical selling? I just...
Yeah, so is a silver medal. Randy just talked about second place, right? So is a silver medal. Yeah, exactly. And I think a lot of it, there's going to be no formula on that. A lot of it comes down to how long your sales cycles are, right? What's the buyer journey, et cetera. I think the inverse of that question, though, is that a lot of times reps spend too many time obsessing over those cycles when the prospect isn't, in fact, really part of the ICP, right, that you're going after, and it's a stretch to begin with, right? So I think a lot of it is just having the intellectual honesty with yourself. Am I really chasing something that I really should be going after, right? And I think if you're honest, you see folks spending a lot of time on sort of the wrong things.
Yeah.
That's
great. You want to tell people ICP?
Yeah, sure. The ideal customer profile. Right, which doesn't mean if they are your ideal customer profile that they'll always be responding to you in real time, just like we would all like it. It doesn't mean that at all, right? But at the end of the day, right, if you're focused on the ideal customer profile, you're focused on the right persona, you're hitting them with, the right message and the right playbook as you've articulated and seen many times, right? It becomes answering that question a lot easier, because the introspection you can do on your process and how you've communicated and what you've done is a lot easier to find if you've done the right things, or if it's just like one of those situations not going to happen for whatever reason. It just becomes a lot easier to kind of be data driven in that approach.
Andrew, I want to build on that. Does your ICP, is it a one and done, or are you constantly learning and evolving it?
Oh, always evolving, right? I mean, I think, one thing, I was having a chat with the VC, friend of mine last week, and we were just having a casual chat on multiples and all that. Whether you think they're right, wrong, or different is irrelevant. But the concept he kind of came up with is like, look, these markets have proven to be much bigger than anyone thought, right? Particularly as it relates to SaaS in the cloud. And if you think about that, right, fundamentally, that also means that the total addressable market or your ideal customer profile on where you start in your journey oftentimes is nowhere near what it is in the end. And so by definition, along that process, you constantly need to be evolving around all of that. but you've got to use data to go drive that, right? Based on industries and use cases and sales cycle lengths and the amount of time it takes to prospect and go from stage 1 to stage 3, et cetera. And when you put all that together, you're able to then really formulate your growth and scale plans based on that data, so you can reliably and predictably understand what will happen as you go through that cycle. And then conversely, as you're trying to penetrate a new vertical, a new TAM, a new persona, you then understand the variables, right, that are necessary there to have a tolerance on, right, timing and experimentation, et cetera. But if that's your only thing, you're going to kill your business, but you have that as a part that's always there, so that when it emerges, right, you get some sort of escape velocity with these experiments kind of coming to a head.
Got it. So Randy, we have a question from LinkedIn. What about LinkedIn visitors?
Awesome. And actually, just before we do that, because we're getting a lot of questions, so before I forget or I miss it, Andrew and I both know Jill Rowley. I had the pleasure of talking to her yesterday for the first time. So she brings up some great points. So Nour, if you're okay, I'm just going to read them for everybody. There's several entries here, and we should post some of these in sales community. But Snowflake hosts weekly office hours that bring together buyers evaluating future advocates and existing customers. So that's great perspective. And then Jill also has a link to Denise Pearson, the CMO of Snowflake, sharing the 5 pillars of their marketing strategy. So I'm sure that's fantastic. And then she also adds qualify out, don't waste anyone's time. So great perspective. It's, you as anybody in sales have to figure out, what's your return on investment in terms of your time. So if it is useful and bad, there is something to be said for kind of cutting your bait off early. And so for refreshing to hear Andrew speak the language of the customers. Jill is probably one of the few that says she was born to be in sales. She's amazingly passionate about customers and customers' perspective, which is fantastic if anybody sees any of her posts. And then I think lastly here from her, too many CROs speak the language of sales, absolutely, instead of the customer and value. So Jill, thank you very much for that.
So back to our question.
All right, sorry. All right.
What are some of the under the radar signals to expand RevOps?
When your business is growing. I know Andrew's been in the weeds on this. Andrew?
Yeah, it was also great to see Jill there. I have a tattoo on my forearm that I learned from her like 10 years ago. Know more, care more, do more, right? And it's all about being customer obsessed and reverse engineering from that. So there's no one better in the world than Jill on those thoughts, which, kind of dovetails into this question, right? Which is, you need to expand your RevOps practice when you are getting and attracting all of this data and signal from your customers, so that you can understand what matters most to them, and then can architect your sales team and your marketing teams to best serve them, right? Because you have to do it based on data and based on being customer obsessed and reverse engineering that, versus the sort of starting point, which is like, I just want pipeline reviews, I want all that data, I want all that metrics. It's obviously important in air and water, but you got to do it from a customer perspective.
All right, Randy, next question we have, let's see, Madhu.
There you go. How do you manage internal pressure when you're trying to close a deal with a new logo? Your manager feels like it is time to close a deal. And I guess for Andrew, it could be top down or you down to your team. That's the world that we live in, right? So it's I'd say it's probably more older school, some of the things that we used to experience in terms of the pressure, hey, get it done. And then you end up, for lack of better words, really, upsetting customers. So I think it's it's a balance. The best thing to do all along is, not the last day of the quarter, but kind of 3 weeks before, which most customers are used to. Is, okay, it is the end of our quarter. In order to kind of get this done, what do we need to do? What are the next steps? Kind of who's around? What's the approval process? And I think more times than not, it's poor qualifying that causes deals to push, as opposed to anything else. If it's laid out right and they understand, they're communicating openly with the customer. Andrew, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I've never seen any pressure to close a deal, so I don't know that. No, I'm kidding. Look, I think the first thing is, how do you deal with the pressure? It's called headspace, right? Get the app, take 10 minutes to yourself, think clearly. No, look, all kidding aside, it's communication, and that's it, right? It's just proper and constant communication with your manager, and things go well, good or bad news, right? Be quick with the information and collaborate. And that pressure, I don't want to say will ever go away, but the ability to deal with it will exponentially go up, and you'll earn a lot more credibility and respect for both good and bad things with the right level of communication.
We're grateful for all the great comments that are coming in. We also would love to hear your questions. So here's the next one from Janet.
Janet Duxbury. Question: the CRO role has become more and more operational. How are you leveraging operations data to make decisions? For example, account selection. What do you look for to know things are working? Yeah, you certainly lots of experience. I know you just had a couple great hires to help in some of these areas, Andrew.
Yeah, thanks, Randy. I think we're doing something fundamentally different, and we are not, hiring a rep in Texas and saying you have oil and gas or you're the TOLA manager, right? We are, because of the instrumentation that we have and understanding of where the intent is and who's actually active and engaged in the open source community, we're building account plans and territory planning based on the demand of the users that are out there, irrespective of geography right now. Now, part of that obviously is the luxury of COVID, if there is such a luxury, right? But regardless of that, we're going based on intent and demand, and the way that we've been able to instrument that, which is showing massive scale and leverage in our model right now that we're really proud of.
Randy, yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I just got a text from Jesse. He said the LinkedIn user was Mike Miles. So Mike Miles, thanks a lot for that.
That's fantastic. So Randy, you and I talked about this. I'm dating myself when I say, RevOps wasn't a thing when we were selling. Talk about the impact and the real value of RevOps in really accelerating the sales and marketing, the team, the company's ability to go to market and really get traction. Yeah,
I mean, the tools and resources that are available today are just crazy, right? So you're not that you don't need salespeople anymore, but I think there's going to be the time where between PLG and other go-to-market tools and things, it's just amazing the investments in revenue ops, which then also probably ties in some to marketing in terms of what you can do, how you can scale. Again, what Andrew's been able to do with what was a relatively small team now growing is just amazing in terms of the kind of ROI that goes along there.
Beautiful. Our next question comes from Ralph.
Ralph, thanks. I'm an SDR. Awesome. I love social media and getting followers. My manager and CEO don't. What's a balance for sales professionals should have? Also, are you hiring? You seem like someone I'd like to work for. So there you go. So I'm sure you can easily reach out to Andrew on LinkedIn. So hopefully your manager and CEO aren't watching this. It's interesting. I mean, I think from your kind of company perspective, using social media and especially LinkedIn, especially kind of Sales Navigator. I mean, Sales Navigator is amazing. You can tag people that you're trying to sell to. You can tag the companies, so that way then you see when they say and do something, you can kind of post, repost, tie in with them. So that aspect of social media, I would say, is fantastic. Certainly listening to things like this, networking with peers. If you're in a sales community, kind of networking, being educated. So sales community is a social media type platform I think are great. If you're going on Facebook and connecting with old boyfriends, girlfriends, whatever, that's probably not a good use of time. But I think as long as it's what I'd call kind of revenue generating time to help you sell more or help you network more, then that's all great. And if they have a problem with that, then as we said early on, in terms of CEO companies you want to work for or work with, then definitely maybe time to look for another company. And Andrew, any other thoughts?
Yeah, I'll just be very blunt. If you're not using social, you're dead. It's kind of that simple, right? If they don't get it, send them Jill Rowley's articles and interviews where she's been talking about this for 10 years. She might get mad at me because maybe it's been 15. But it's the only way to work these days. And if that is not part of one of your core strategies, good luck, because even if you had massive PLG, you still then need to use that, right, for promotion of the community and content, right? So even that drives PLG. So it's essential. There's a needle to thread. It's got to be done right, but it's an imperative. It's air and water.
Randy, for our audience that may not be as familiar with sales community, you've got some great resources up there. And Madhu's comment, are there some that really point to go-to-market strategies, or are there other resources that either one of you are familiar with that could help in how do we maybe stress test our approach or benchmark our approach against other go-to-market strategies?
Yeah, so I'll put in a plug for sales community. Andrew can disagree. It's great. You can go in there and ask questions, from any perspective. SDRs asking questions, CRO asking best practices around different things, and from it you'll find there's really not that much what I call kind of direct competition. So you can also find somebody who might, or a handful of people give great answers. Then maybe you kind of break off with them one-on-one. So sales community would be my easy answer. Andrew?
Yeah, thanks, Randy. I would agree, but I'm not paid. I don't even have a T-shirt, right? I did kind of break out an old button down that's not getting used anymore. So, but look, there's no website that's going to tell you how to go do that. You've got to go network on your own, right? You've got to come up with a thesis. You've got to be vulnerable, and you've got to get out there and share your ideas with others and be willing to be told that there are opportunities to look at things in a different way. The sales community is an amazing place to go do that and to find those people to network with, but you've got to add value in return. And for me, the best way of benchmarking has always been collaboration with peers and people that you respect in the industry.
So let's build on that a second. I have a love-hate relationship with cliches, right? One of the ones I'm hearing a lot more in the sales environment is force multiplier. Andrew, give us an example of that within Astronomer. What's an example that really makes you think that's a good investment of time, effort, resources?
Yeah.
Besides them hiring you.
What'd you say, Randy?
Besides them hiring you.
Yeah. Maybe. My boss might beg to differ. No, I'm just kidding. Look, in the case of force multiplier, again, it comes back to content and community, right? Delivering the right set of assets, right, to your buyer personas, in this case, the developers, to support that bottoms up motion and making them more self-sufficient without having to talk to you, so that they can get value before they engage with you, is the way in which you get force multiplier. It's not by hiring more reps. It's not by saying I need 50 more reps to go do that. It's by doing the right things to engage, right, the people that are going to use your product so that they can get outcomes and value before they engage with you. Sometimes it's counterintuitive, but you do that right, you then get force multipliers in your business, in your community, and your brand all at once.
Randy, I love that answer. Can you build on it? What are other examples that sales professionals, marketing teams, RevOps can remove? What Andrew's describing to me sounds like we're removing friction out of the way they buy, out of the way they want to learn, engage with you. What are other ways you've seen successful tech companies remove that friction in how their buyers want to buy?
Yeah, so I was going to say there's internal maybe force multipliers, which is for lack of better words, what's the stupid stuff that sales teams are being asked to do that are not revenue generating. And probably the bigger company you get, the more there's kind of reports because somebody wants to see this or see that, or they want to be lazy and all this stuff. So I was always a big fan of, hey, it should be anything that sales team's doing. Obviously, you got to do Salesforce to whatever degree you can there. Great new company, by the way, Dooley, that has a great way, which is tied in with Ed Sim, which I know you're a friend and investor with as well. But anyway, so there's force multipliers around just having the sales team be as effective as possible, and then for customers, which we need to have Jill on here, but I think kind of what is the how do you make it easy? What is the easy button? The old days we'd have all kinds of criteria for POCs and evaluations, all that stuff, and now it's this PLG. You're just kind of letting individual developers or whoever it is just kind of on board. You try it. You just kind of make it as seamless as possible, and ideally they want you more than you have to be kind of selling yourself.
Yeah,
So, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to add, David, it's just literally self-service. Can your customers use your product before they have to talk to you, which is actually very counterintuitive to sales professionals and particularly to sometimes the head of revenue, right? But that's a good thing, which, by the way, sometimes it means they'll never pay, and that's okay. Like, to your point on Ed Sim, look at Sneak, right? And look at what they're doing, right, with self-service in the free tier, and I think their unit economics are just fine.
Yeah.
So, Andrew, hold on a second. I want to ask you
company valuation.
Right. Andrew, I want to ask you a follow-up question. If you're selling to developers who are technically savvy, can in essence self-support themselves, right? So that may be one. If it's a more complex sale, if it's more of an enterprise, if it's more of a solving a fundamental business problem, do you still believe the self-service is a good initial interaction? I've always said none of us are in the ice cream business, but if you give them an ice cream, a lot of times they'll come back wanting more. Can that self-service also work in more complex and enterprise sales?
Unequivocally, yes. In fact, it's actually should still be the default motion, although in that complex sale, you'd run in parallel, right? Where you are doing the right level of discovery and framing and enablement business case, justification. But if they're using your software in parallel to that, you're able to then actually accelerate the business case, the outcomes they're seeking to achieve, and they're doing it with their hands on software. They're going to have way more passion and conviction to move forward with you at a more accelerated pace and perhaps even larger dollars because of that comfort level, right? Versus having to go through 6 months and then wait and then install and go through that whole process. And it's a year before they actually really know if they made the right or wrong decision, right? I think that paradigm shift needs to be massively inverted.
You were massively successful at Pivotal, right? I think you mentioned 0 to like 500 million in revenue and IPO. And is there anything you would have done differently in that scenario?
I'm proud of what we're done. And most importantly, I'm proud of everyone I got to work with, the team members and our customers and partners. It was an honor to be a part of. I think, to your point here, we did a lot of really nice work around the open source community, and I'm also very proud of that. I think looking back in hindsight's 2020, all of my comments on self-service, we had an opportunity to perhaps do a little bit of a better job on, and I think would have actually provided even more exponential and accelerated growth. So I think that'd be the big one that I'd hit on.
Got it. So Randy, we got a question from Ralph this is an important one.
All right. Thanks, Ralph. Sales is a heavily male-dominated industry. How can we build a more diverse group of technology sales professionals? So a lot of obviously angles here on the diversity, but if you talk about in terms of women, I was talking to Jill yesterday, and there's the kind of those that are in sales. You can certainly culture, nurture, develop kind of more along, but I would argue you have to go to the kind of back into the college area. So matter of fact, tonight at 5, I was supposed to do a LinkedIn Live with Megan Robbins, who's a Florida State University, and she's a sales star. And they've got an amazing program. And I was going to do a Q&A for college students, but unfortunately, she just came down with COVID. So we're going to do another time. But I would say going back into the college ranks for women and all of those in the diversity ranks is probably the biggest thing we can do long term. Andrew, other things that you see maybe even kind of shorter term?
Yeah, it just comes down to commitment, and you've got to focus on it, right? It's a hard problem because the population is small that fits that, but it's on all of us to help grow that, foster that, and give people a chance. And, I've tried to work really hard to go do that and to stay very committed and active in those communities internally and externally, and ensure that, you're focused on, achieving the right ratios and the right balance. I firmly believe in it. And candidly, diversity of thought is one of the most important things you can have in any team. And so as a leader, hiring all people that are like you is actually a recipe for disaster. So you need to work very hard at avoiding that.
And Ralph, just a quick plug for the Sales Community Podcast. We've had several very competent, very capable women executives talk about that. Jazz Soot comes to mind. Paolo Dobell comes to mind. We just had Jennifer Haas. We've got Mary Beth Vosello coming. So I think it's really important for successful women executives, but also other diverse groups. As Andrew mentioned, diversity of thought, to model the right behaviors, but also mentor, coach, lead, sponsor others to kind of get the same opportunities. So thanks for that question. Randy, we got a question from Tucker.
Tucker. For that self-service model, how are sales and marketing teams at Astronomer working together to proactively support the Airflow community? For example, content guides, best practices. Andrew?
Yeah, thanks, Tucker. So they're not just working together, they're viewed as one, in my opinion, right? So sales and marketing are attached at the hip, and there isn't all that much distinction. So there's no friction there. And I think I spoke a lot about really helping the buyer on their journey and delivering massive amount of value and content to them. And it takes a lot of discipline to say that also means that you're not going to sell probably 90% of the people in your community. And that actually means that you're doing the right things. Right. And so, you need to make sure that you're focused on delivering value to that community. And in fact, kind of sometimes be a little bit counterintuitive. And so the sales and marketing teams are very well aligned at ensuring that we're delivering value. And if you do that, all the rest kind of comes to play. And making sure there's no friction in the internal process to support that has been key.
I love this next question. Jared wants to know about tools. So what are some of the sales marketing tools you're excited about that helps you from day-to-day basis as CRO or sales rep? Andrew, why don't you go first? And I'd love to hear Seidl, and I'm going to share a couple as well.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm not afraid to plug an off-the-shelf tool, but we built a lot ourselves with the help of a lot of people in the sales community to really help us drive where the intent is coming from in the open source community. And I think it's our secret sauce and our value add, which tells us what content needs to be out there, which tells us, right, how do we best serve our customers? And so from our perspective, it's really been a much more ingrained approach towards data science and leveraging all these alternative data sources for us to kind of drive our business forward. So we're really excited about that. And it's kind of custom built, and we're pretty proud of it. Randy Seidl.
Yeah, so I had mentioned Dooley earlier, which helps reps for the time it takes entering their data for Salesforce. That was not me. 6 Sense, which is a great one on the ABM tool. Copilot, which likewise helps sales teams more kind of the Q&A side of things to know the information. And then, what's more important than commissions? There's a great one, Captivate IQ, which is a SaaS-based commission platform. So it helps reps and the companies figure out what's commission, where and when. And, ideally, and I know in the podcast we talked about comp plans, so this may, dovetail into a question. But ideally, Andrew, I'm sure you agree, you want to have a comp plan, drive the right behavior. And I'm sure you've seen some good and bad around comp plans and around quotas.
Jared, I might just floor you and the entire community with my answer. Are you sitting down? Because this is one of those, in the words of Britney Spears, rocket surgery. You ready? Postcards. We just had 5,000 postcards printed. And for our audience, these things are these relics called stamps. Here's the key. relationships I'm talking to are not going into the office. So how would I get something in their hands? If you create an interesting enough conversation, you'd be amazed of how many people will share their personal information, including their addresses. And we're sending out about 10 to 20 of these personal handwritten notes and postcards with stamps out to our relationships. And it reinforces that it might be old school, but you're committed to that relationship. You're committed to creating value, adding value, proactively staying in touch. So thanks for that. Andrew, in our last few minutes, trends that you've observed during the pandemic that you believe will have a lasting impact on tech sales in the post-pandemic world?
Yeah, very good question, David. And I think the trends are that people are actually busier and working harder than ever. And that Zoom fatigue is a real thing and is here to stay for a while. So you better make sure that your sales calls are very prescriptive, very crisp, and very dialed in, and that you're deeply thinking about that, not the least of which are the distractions that many people have from home, as they did not contemplate their home to also be their office, which is going to stay constant for a while. And so there's a lot of things that you need to think through there that are not going to go away, particularly in the developer space, where a lot of them actually are proven to be more productive at home and like it, and companies are going to allow that. And conversely, executives that had 2-hour train rides into Manhattan each way, that will now do that once or twice a week and will still be remote 3 days a week. Right. This is here to stay. So there are, techniques and strategies that, have emerged that we need to stay constant and should be here for a while.
Randy, I'm going to ask you the same question. Trends you've observed that are going to have a profound impact on the other side of this?
Yeah, I mean, Andrew touched on in the podcast, which is, I think, just the productivity. So Zooms and not being face-to-face certainly is a downside, but I think in general, if you can do it right, your touch points and productivity are huge. If you have the existing relationships from a sales perspective, it makes life a lot easier. If you don't have those relationships, then what are some of the creative things like we've talked about today that you can do to try to get those?
So again, on behalf of the community, I want to thank Andrew Ettinger. You're a fabulous podcast guest earlier today. I would encourage our audience, make sure you go listen, salescommunity.com/podcast. We also have some great events coming up, and I'll give Randy a final note on that one to kind of talk about some of our things. We also host these weekly Ask Me Anything, AMAs. Next week, our guest is Craig Hinckley, the CEO of White Hat Security. The podcast episode is focused on leading from within, so you definitely don't want to miss that. Randy, let me give you the final comments before we let Andrew go.
Absolutely, yes. Nour, thanks. Andrew, thanks. For those that are not members of Sales Community, feel free to join. For those that are, thank you very much. We got a great engagement, great content. salescommunity.com. We've got a very easy, I call it no-brainer, 30-day free trial. I've started to do some podcasts. So Peter Bell and I are hosting Paul Salamanca, who's a VP of Sales from Security Scorecard, tonight at 7 p.m. East. Next Thursday, I believe, somewhere between 5 and 7, Peter Bell and I are hosting Peter McKay, who we talked about from Sneak. And look forward to doing some of those. And the one that I had to reschedule with Megan Robbins from Florida State, we're looking forward to rescheduling it. But Andrew, Nour, thanks so much for all those that took the time. Really appreciate it. And we're a wrap, right, Nour?
Yep. Thanks, everybody. See you next week.
All right.
Take
Thanks.
care.
Thanks, guys.